Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast. I'm Patrick Brown. I'll be hosting this episode. I'm joined by Ron Callahan. This will be a football episode, so if you're looking for the Tony Vitello discussion with Ben McKee, that will be in a different episode. I believe should have one out on the streams or all the places you get podcasts here imminently, possibly even before this one. But don't pick one. Listen to both. We would appreciate that. So. Hope you guys are having a good week. It's obviously been an unusual week for Tennessee fans. Ryan, after the Saturday, we were getting some lunch in Birmingham before heading to Tuscaloosa, and that's when I think it was The Athletic first reported that Tony Vitello might be the new manager or might be becoming the new manager of the San Francisco Giants. And then certainly there were a few days of limbo there where Tennessee fans were hoping their national championship baseball coach would not be leaving. He is. Tennessee ended up losing to Alabama that night, so not a great day for Tennessee fans, but things are moving forward. And Tennessee this week, the football program, which we'll be focusing on in this episode, is getting ready to play Kentucky. Ryan, how have you handled this week of tumult here on Rocky Top?
Yeah, it's not too often you see baseball stealing the show from football in mid to late October, but here we are. That shows, quite a compliment to what Tony Vitello had done with the program to have that be the case. But been an interesting week for sure, and to see Tennessee at this weird spot with the football program too right now. Obviously, doesn't make fans feel any better. It just feels like it's a tough spot in the season. Kind of that time of the year where it becomes a real grind. The physical toll of all these SEC games starts to accumulate, and it's just a tough time of year. But yeah, Tennessee not. At least it feels like this team just not playing its best lately, and has some things to work out going into this game at Kentucky. And not a lot of juice for this game with Kentucky being a winless team in conference play right now, but it's an important one. This team needs to kind of get back on track with obviously a big game ahead next week against Oklahoma.
Yeah, and it was a disappointing night for Tennessee and Tuscaloosa. We talked about that from the concourse of Bryant-Denny Stadium after the game, just how Tennessee really did give itself a chance to be in that game for longer than it was, with just some mistakes on the field, some puzzling decisions from the sideline and the coaching booth. So, but they've got to bounce back. This is they had to do this a couple of years ago when they lost a tough one at Alabama, and then they turned around and we're in a 4-quarter battle with Kentucky. A lot of these games up there over the past decade or so have been close games, and Josh Heupel has been pointing to that throughout the week. He's pointed out how Kentucky took Texas to overtime and really kind of dominated that game from the box score standpoint. The difference in that game for Kentucky was I think they got stopped on 4th down early in the game, might have missed a field goal, and then of course in overtime they get stuffed there at the goal line a couple times, and then Texas had a couple of long punt returns that set up 10 of their 16 points or 10 of their 13 points in regulation. So. That's a team that was coming off a good game, but also a heartbreaker too. So, and this is obviously a very important game for both sides. But first, we will touch on the availability report because there is some notable news there. The first one of the week came out on Wednesday night. Tennessee had 4 players listed as questionable: linebackers Arion Carter and Ben Bolton, wide receiver Radarius Jackson, who has been out the past few weeks, and tight end Ethan Davis, who gets the questionable tag again despite having missed, I think it's 4 games in a row now, Ryan. So. No Jamon McCoy. He's already been ruled out this week. Obviously, Reed Gibson is out as well, and Travis Smith Jr. remains out. That'll be a 3rd game in a row, I believe he's missed. So, but obviously the big news there is Arion Carter. He is Tennessee's top linebacker. He's their leading tackler. He's actually leading tackler in the SEC. So, what is his situation? What can you tell us about the chances of first of all, why he's on the injury report at all, and what are the chances that he'll be in uniform on Saturday night in Lexington?
Yeah, Arion Carter has been dealing with double turf toe. He has turf toe in each of his big toes and has played through it the past 2 games. That's a tough thing to do. If you're not someone on the checkerboard on GoVols247 said that turf toe sort of gives a not so bad sounding name to what's often a pretty brutal injury to play through. Just ask Joe Burrow, who had surgery on his foot after dealing with turf toe earlier this season. So he's going to miss about 3 months with that by the time he's able to maybe come back in December or so. At least they're hoping. I think the Bengals are that he'll be back before the end of the season. But yeah, different degrees of turf toe injuries, obviously. So not each one is as bad as Burrow's, but yeah, certainly Arion Carter's been battling just to play through that. And I don't think he played very well Saturday night because of the injuries he's dealing with. Didn't make a lot of plays, didn't make a lot happen out there. So I think it had kind of reached the point where where it was going to be tough for him to continue playing through it at a high level anyway. And so to see him pop up on the injury report this week, not a huge surprise. I would put him in the very questionable category right now. I think that's definitely one to keep an eye on going into Saturday. So would not be surprised if he ends up sitting out this game. But it's definitely something that even if he's out there, you've got to assume you're not going to get anything close to a 100% Arion Carter in this game. So really no way to heal an injury like that aside from rest. So if you can buy him a week of rest or even a couple, that's not the worst thing in the world to do if you want him healthy down the stretch. So we'll see how they approach that. But yeah, that's obviously a tough injury. He's been trying to play through, doing his best, but the last two games and especially Saturday, I think that injury affected him quite a bit, and it's gotten to a point where he might need to sit out a game to get healthier.
Yeah, we should mention that Joey Aguilar was not on the report. There were some, Josh Heupel was asked about him on Monday and said he would be fine. Obviously, Aguilar took a pretty hard hit on his scramble there in the second quarter. I broke this down on our X's and O's feature this week on GoVols247, but he had a guy open on that play. He had Miles Kitselman coming across and had outside position on the cornerback who was kind of overplaying the crosser coming from the other way. And Aguilar, for whatever reason, doesn't pull the trigger, and then he tries to make a play and takes a big hit. They ended up having to work on his neck on the sideline. And but Josh Heupel said he's fine. He's obviously not on the injury report. Not that he's 100%, but nobody is throughout this part of at this point of the season. But Arion Carter leads the SEC in tackles with 61, 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack, and a forced fumble in 7 games this season. Ryan, you talked about his play against Alabama. There's one play in particular that I also put on that film breakdown that I think kind of shows just how limited he is by this injury. On the fourth down, middle of the fourth quarter, I mean, if the game's still very much a game at that point, Tennessee, if they get a stop there, they can go down and score and maybe set up if you got timeouts left, you can set up, a pretty, maybe a big finale there, or maybe get yourself back in the game if you get a stop on that play. And Tennessee does a good job taking away Ty Simpson's first 2 reads. He breaks that out of the pocket, tries to scramble. Arion Carter is in perfect position to make the play, turn it inside, get the quarterback down, and he just doesn't have the explosiveness, the change of the burst to go make the play. Simpson gets around him, gets away from the pursuing defensive lineman, and gets the first down. And then they get a late hit penalty on it too. So I think that play really shows just how limited he is by these injuries. And as you touched on, it seems like the 2 options are rest, or if it was bad enough to need surgery, that would be a different situation. But we'll see if he suits up. If he doesn't, I think obviously Edwin Spillman would step into the starting lineup, and then we'll have to see what the rest of the linebacker rotation looks like, because Ben Bolton has been a part of that. He's on that too. He's on the injury report too. So you could be having maybe a Jaden Perlotti. He's played a lot over the last couple of games. He could be your third linebacker. He could see increased opportunities in this game. Where do they go with Jaden Harmon, who Josh Heupel was asked about earlier this week? William Inge a few weeks ago said that he should have played Harmon more against Georgia, and I don't think he's played maybe a single snap on defense since that game. Maybe he got in against UAB, but those young guys that need to keep coming along, and certainly Perlotti has done that. But that end of that rotation has been sort of all over the place the last few weeks, and now you're potentially maybe you don't have Arion Carter in this game, and so that'll be interesting to see how they play that.
Yeah, like you said, you would kind of first assume that it's a big opportunity maybe for Jaden Perlotti to get in there if Carter does have to sit this one out. He's been there, as you said, more the last couple of weeks. Has had some good moments. He played 15 snaps against Alabama on defense. Bolton, to your point, only played 3 snaps before. I believe he got hurt in that game and had to come out, right? So maybe that
he was. It looked like he was the third down linebacker early on, and then Perlotti was the rest of the way.
Yeah, so that's whether that was because of injury or ineffectiveness or just wanting to make a change there, whatever. That Perlotti got significantly more snaps than even Bolton in that game. So you would think he's the next one up if someone has to move up in the rotation a bit and play more snaps. So could be a big opportunity for him in this game. And certainly Kentucky, the way they play, linebacker is important in any game, but Kentucky, they like to run the football. It's going to be a big challenge from a physicality standpoint. If a freshman linebacker like Perlotti has to get in there, Kentucky usually has a pretty good offensive line. Does what it does, relatively well, even though they're not a high-powered offense. They often have some success in the run game against Tennessee. That not so much in Knoxville, but when this game's in Lexington, Kentucky's been able to move the ball relatively well at times. So this will be a challenge if Perlotti's in there a good bit in this game, and we'll see how he, if it is him, we'll see how he sort of answers the bell and whether he can make the most of his opportunity. But Jaden Harmon's the other one you wonder about, whether he can be a beneficiary of any available playing time there might be. I haven't seen a lot from him lately. Really liked what I saw from him early. I think there's a lot of ability there, but for whatever reason, it seems like Perlotti has kind of leapfrogged him in the pecking order and put himself in position to maybe be that next man up. And this week might be one of those weeks where he's needed. We kind of said it going into the open date. You're going to need to bring some freshmen along at multiple spots. You're going to need some of those guys at some point, and there will probably be other injuries in the weeks to come. But this is certainly one that looks like it might test Tennessee's depth a little bit. And the good news for them is they're relatively deep at linebacker compared to some other positions. So you've at least got some talented young guys to rely on, which is maybe not the case at some other positions, or at least you don't have as many talented young guys at other positions. Tennessee at least has a few options here. Brendan Ains would also be an option down the line if you need another young guy. So we'll see who they travel to this game. That'll be interesting to see, and then also who plays. But certainly a potentially big chance for a guy like Jaden Perlotti.
I think they've been taking 8 linebackers. So I believe Arion, Edwin Spillman, T. Lander, Perlotti, Harmon, Ains, Bolton. I think there's one more. Maybe I'm forgetting. I need to look up the roster. But as you were talking there, I was thinking, is this a Jaden Perlotti kind of game? He's more of probably more of a space guy. Harmon's probably a little bit better in the box. But when asked about him earlier this week, Josh Heupel kind of pointed to the practice field and said, quote, proof of your product is in your preparation on the practice field. And so they just want to see continued growth from Harmon too. So obviously it'll be a big week for him on the practice field. So we'll see how that plays out. But the other, I guess, notable item from the injury report is Rodarius Jackson, I guess, being upgraded. He was ruled out pretty early last week. He's questionable to start this week again. We'll see if he plays. He took a hard hit on his shoulder against Georgia and has not played since. But that would be probably beneficial for Tennessee if he was available, because they are playing Chris Brazzell, Mike Matthews, and Braylon Staley a lot of snaps. And I asked that to Kelsey Pope, Tennessee's wide receivers coach, after practice on Tuesday when we spoke to him. And he said that they're fine with it so far. He kind of pointed to how Staley and Matthews in particular, those guys were maybe a little frustrated that they weren't playing more last season, and now they're getting as many snaps as they can handle. And certainly those guys want to be on the field, but if you're Tennessee, you got to make sure that you're not overplaying them to where there is decline in their play as games go on. And Kelsey Pope said they're not really seeing that. They're still seeing, some separation in routes and things like that in the fourth quarter of games, and still seeing, he said maybe there needs to be some sharper focus in the fourth quarter. So he kind of said that, the only really sign of fatigue is maybe more mental than physical at this point. But he said they do stuff during the games to try to maybe rest those guys here and there. Obviously, when they go to 12 personnel, one of those receivers is not on the field. He also made an interesting point that they will slow the tempo down sometimes to maybe give those guys a breather. I think they probably do that for the whole offense. Once you get into, if you get into an 8-9 play drive, they get closer to the red zone. Sometimes they'll slow down maybe to give the receivers and their offensive line a quick blow to chance to catch their breath there before those pivotal plays. But are we okay with this? Ryan, I've always thought that the discussion about Tennessee's receiver rotation was one of the more overblown complaints of the Josh Heupel tenure. Now we'll see what happens next year when they could potentially have a lot of guys who will want to play and expect to play. But right now, you go back to 22. Are you taking Jalen Hyatt off the field to play Walker Merrill? I mean, are you taking Cedric Tillman when he's healthy, or Mel Keaton when he's playing well off the field to play a Jimmy Holiday? And 2023 they had a lot of injuries. So didn't really have a lot of options. Right now, they don't really have a lot of options with Rodarius Jackson and Travis Smith being out the past few games. So do they need to get those guys a breather, or are those guys, they need to be on the field even more, given that they weren't on the field for the biggest play of the game last week against Alabama?
Yeah, I think that's a separate discussion to me. I would have had some of those guys out there for the
for sure
one of the biggest plays in the game. But yeah, no, I think you need at least a fourth guy to rotate in there and to give everybody a little bit of a breather. You're not going to have them off the field very much, just given the setup of this team. And to your point, they're some of your best playmakers, and it's someone different every game. So you certainly don't want to mix in a freshman who may or may not be ready to play that many snaps when you've got those guys playing pretty well. But yeah, when Kelsey Pope is admitting, and if you didn't see the comment, I thought that was pretty enlightening. He said, obviously you do see it late in games, but what we try to do as coaches is try to slow our tempo down, try to get in and out of personnel to try to maybe save their legs here or there. so you can do some things schematically and with play calling to help them. I think some fans might have been alarmed a bit to hear that that's maybe impacting the offensive game plan in spots, but it's the reality of what you have when you don't have a ton of depth at some of those positions, especially one that's running up and down the field a lot from one play to the next, and especially when you go down the field in the passing game as much as Tennessee does. So, yeah, I think they could really use Rodarius Jackson in this game, or whether it's, even if it's just next week by the Oklahoma game, getting him back soon would be a really big deal for Tennessee. And it does sound like that's the questionable tag, I think, pretty accurate on Rodarius Jackson at this point. That one might end up being a game time decision on Saturday, so we'll see where that one goes. But even if he's not back in this game, the fact that he's that close to returning, it looks like very good news for Tennessee, because you do need some help there. You need another guy that can give your guys a breather at times. And then I think he's a young guy that can help Tennessee. He was showing some signs of being capable of contributing, and some early flashes here and there. A lot of buzz going into the season for Travis Smith. I think once the season started, behind the scenes, just as much buzz about Rodarius Jackson and how much excitement there is about his potential. So that's a talented young guy that I think Tennessee could really use. And yeah, bottom line, you just need somebody else in that rotation to be able to give you a few snaps, because if they're at a point right now where if he's not out there, someone goes down, who's the next man up? I mean, it may be Joakim Dotson. It might be a walk-on. Amari Jefferson, we were talking about this Saturday, Patrick, has not traveled to either of Tennessee's SEC road games. So you're looking at Trey Weary, Tommy Winton, or Joakim Dotson being the next.
That's the only three other guys they traveled. Yeah, to Alabama.
So it's either that, if someone goes down, you're either forced to play 12 personnel and only have two receivers out there at one time, or you're going to one of those guys, a walk-on or a freshman. So definitely not an ideal depth situation. They've managed it so far through 7 games, but couldn't be a better time to potentially get Rodarius Jackson back if he is able to play Saturday.
Yeah, looking at I should go back. The other linebacker we did mention was Jordan Burns. He was the 8th linebacker that traveled. So
that's right.
He is another potential guy that could help, and maybe
and to your point earlier, this might be a Jordan Burns kind of game. He's a guy that I think plays with a little more physicality. So probably a good matchup for Jeremiah Thielander with the way Kentucky plays. This is kind of his type of game. I think Jordan Burns could be the same type of player that maybe has a chance to be a factor. And like you said, they've kind of mixed and matched at the back end of that rotation. So maybe he's the guy more so than Perlotti this week. You just never know with the way that's gone. But Perlotti, back-to-back games now, has played a decent amount. So certainly would still think he might have the edge, but Burns is a guy we've at least seen in there before and could be capable of contributing in this game.
Yeah, back to the receivers, doing some quick math while you were talking there. Staley, Matthews, Browse, all between 75 and 80% of the offensive snaps this season. They're all over 400 snaps for the entire season. So getting plenty of run, but also producing. I believe Brazel is 2nd, Staley is 5th, and Matthews is 10th in the SEC in receiving yards. So they're not just out there, they're making plays. And going back and watching the game the other night, I thought they did make some good plays. Obviously, everybody focused on the Matthews drop, which was not ideal, but certainly those guys are making plays. And if they're able to continue to put full 4 quarters together, that's good for Tennessee. The other talking point this week from coming out of the Alabama game, and Josh Heupel was asked about on Monday, is what is Tennessee doing on the offensive line? We saw 8 different offensive linemen play against Alabama. Really, it was 6. David Sanders plus the 5 starters. William Satterwhite has been getting a series here and there over the past couple of weeks. I think he only got 1 series against Alabama. Bennett Warren played, I think, 6 snaps at left tackle because Lance Hurd was in injury tent. So that maybe 7 guys, maybe 6.5 is what we can call the rotation. But Josh Heupel said this week that it's going to continue, that they went back and feel comfortable with some of the guys that are playing multiple positions. Obviously, that's Wendell Moy, who's flipping between right and left guard. That's Jesse Perry, who's playing right guard and right tackle. I think it was the second series we finally saw the lineup that Tennessee was probably going to start the season with Hurd left tackle, Moy left guard, Sam Pendleton at center, Perry at right guard, David Sanders Jr. at right tackle, before Sanders obviously had the shoulder issue flare up. So a lot of flip-flopping back and forth. It seemed like they had a new lineup on the offensive line every series, and Josh Heupel said that some of the mistakes that the offensive linemen made, they as a staff didn't really feel like those were caused by moving pieces around. I do think Wendell Moy, his first snap at left guard, did give up a sack, so maybe that's not entirely the case. But where do you fall on this, Ryan? I'm kind of more of a get your best 5 out there. and play them. Certainly, Josh Heupel has sort of alluded to this by talking about saying, hey, we're going to need all these guys. Well, they've played a lot of them over the past 2 or 3 games. So should they just put David Sanders in the starting lineup and go with what they had going into the season? Should they continue rotating? Josh Heupel said they will continue rotating. Do you think that's the right decision?
Yeah, this is an interesting call, I think, because you do have to move some guys around to make room for David Sanders. It's tricky. You're not just replacing the right tackle and that's that, or even just moving Jesse Perry to right guard and taking out the other right guard. You've got to move Wendell Moy Jr. over to left guard. So you're changing 3 positions to change out 1 player. That's not ideal. I think that can lead to issues like you're talking about, the sack that Moy gave up, just because you are playing a little bit different technique when you flip from one side to the other. Even if you've done it before, you're going against a different guy suddenly that you haven't been lining up against on the previous series. You're kind of switching feet and directions, sort of angles, the way you play at that position compared to the other side. That's not an ideal change to have to make in the middle of a game. It can certainly be done, but it is asking a bit of an offensive line to be able to pull that off seamlessly. So I think they're clearly working toward David Sanders Jr. being able to take that starting job. And last week he played 49 snaps against Alabama. Really good sign that he was able to do that, and not only do it, but do it at a pretty high level. His pass blocking grade was over 80 on PFF. And he also was the highest graded offensive lineman for Tennessee overall by a pretty significant margin. If you put much stock into those grades, which I know different people have different opinions on those, but David Sanders graded out with a 75.8. The next closest Tennessee lineman was Lance Hurd at 65.1. So, I thought he played well the other night. If he continues to build on that, you would think he's going to be ready to at least push for that starting job, if not take it outright here in the near future. So that's a good sign for this team. He's clearly got the highest ceiling of anybody on that offensive line, with the possible exception of Lance Hurd. And that they envision him being a starter from day one for a reason. He's got a lot of natural ability, and if he can minimize the bumps in the road, he could have a really good stretch run here this season that could set him up pretty well to be talked about as one of the better offensive linemen in the league sooner rather than later. So we'll see if he can continue on this path. But last week, playing against a high level opponent, obviously that was a very good step in the right direction for David Sanders. And now we'll see how Tennessee manages that. But yeah, I think it's a trickier conversation. I'm sure their plan is to continue making it work and play at least 6 guys. And to your point, earlier, that there weren't a lot of snaps for Williams Satterwhite, only 3 snaps for Satterwhite and 6 for Bennett Warren. So really, mostly a 6-man rotation. You just had a couple series where those guys got in. But yeah, as long as they've got the options, I guess they're going to continue to make it work. And, we'll see if it ends up hurting them in some way to have that lack of continuity. But sometimes that can cause you to rethink things. And I think, when David Sanders, or if he takes that starting job and runs with it, it's maybe going to be more of a discussion of, are you really going to keep rotating guys to keep getting, I guess at that point, Sham Umarov back in the game? At that point, what's best for the team? I think that becomes a different discussion. Maybe right now you clearly need to work David Sanders into the game as long as he's not in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I haven't gone back and tracked, okay, which lineup was in for this drive and which lineup was the best combination. I'm sure Tennessee's coaches have done that, but the offensive line, I thought, kind of struggled in the first half. I mentioned Moy giving up a play. They didn't pick up a linebacker shooting a gap on that first 3rd down that got stopped. Lance Hurd gives up a sack. Jesse Perry gets pushed back into Joey Aguilar on the safety, but the offensive line came around. I thought they played a lot better as the game went on, so maybe they finally settled into some of the chopping and changing, or maybe Tennessee finally decided to give the ball to DeSean Bishop, who's red hot right now. He's got 269 yards over the past 2 games, averaging, I think, 9.6 yards per carry. He's over 10 if you want to get real selective with your stats and throw in that 25-yard touchdown run against Mississippi State in overtime. But just 14 carries the past 2 weeks. I know Tennessee wants to play 3 guys. Peyton Lewis and Star Thomas haven't necessarily been bad, but you got to feed DeSean Bishop. I mean, he even kind of said after the game that, if you watched me in high school where he got 40 carries a game, that he gets better with more of a workload. You got to get him the ball quite a bit in this game, don't you, Ryan? Do you think they finally give DeSean Bishop more than 14 carries, and do you think he stays hot? Because he's turned into a pretty good SEC running back. I think he's 5th in the league in rushing, and his yards per carry average is, I think, 7.5 yards. I think it leads the league.
Yeah, I think too many people had the idea in their heads for a long time that DeSean Bishop's a former preferred walk-on, came to Tennessee as a walk-on. That he doesn't have that kind of ability. He's looking like an NFL running back to me, and I kind of thought he had a chance to be that from even last year when he was getting snaps behind Dylan Sampson. He just looks like the kind of savvy runner who's not. He doesn't have any one particular thing he does just remarkably well, but he does everything at a pretty high level, and I think has really good vision and patience as a runner that kind of underscores his experience. Years of experience, as you were talking about, getting just a ton of work in that backfield at Carnes, where they just had to build the offense around him, and they were not even throwing as much as they were running, and just having to carry the load for a high school team like that. I think he learned how to play against stacked lines of scrimmage and how to show a lot of patience as a runner, and it shows up on the field on Saturdays. He's really running well right now, and this is just a couple weeks after he left the Arkansas game with what looked like a potentially pretty nasty injury. He's been fine since that, and has played two of his best games coming off that, or I guess in that game, and then another really good game this past week. So yeah, that I think you got to keep feeding him, and especially in a game like this, Kentucky's defense has been, vulnerable at times. Also, played really well against Texas last week and gave Kentucky a chance to win that game in overtime. But this is not a defense that you can't beat on the ground. And to that point, our guys at our Kentucky site that gave us some insight this week for our Behind Enemy Lines feature talked about Kentucky struggling with tackling. It sounds a little bit like Tennessee right now, where they're not tackling very well. And as long as that's the case, Kentucky pretty mediocre statistically against the run, 68th nationally, averaging allowing about 155 yards a game. Or I'm sorry, that's rushing offense, but it's a pretty mediocre run defense, I think, by their traditional standards. They've often been pretty good against the run, and the 55th nationally, I should say, against the run, allowing 135 yards a game on the ground. So yeah, I think that's an opportunity for Tennessee to maybe be a little more patient with the run game this week. I thought they didn't run it enough last week against Alabama, frankly, with as well as they were running it between Bishop and Star Thomas. And yeah, you would think there's a chance for Tennessee to continue to take advantage of the hot hand in this game if Bishop is running that well early in the game.
Patrick Brown here with Ryan Callahan on this episode of the GoVols247 Podcast. Ryan, we're going to shift now to more of a game preview mode, looking at Tennessee and Kentucky. This is always a unique matchup. It's always a clash of styles. Kentucky wants to run the ball, play defense, limit possession, shorten the game, do all those things. There's obviously a lot of familiarity, easy for me to say, between these two programs. Josh Heupel and Mark Stoops, this will be their fifth meeting. The defensive staff that Stoops has, they've been there 4 and 5 years together. Brad White, the defensive coordinator, has been the defensive coordinator for, I think this is his 7th or 8th season. So there's really no secrets, but Kentucky's really struggled to stop Tennessee in these matchups. Heupel is 4-0 against Stoops. You look at the numbers, they're pretty good throwing the ball, running the ball. And Kentucky has played pretty good defense against a lot of teams, but they haven't quite figured out Tennessee. So, and this is a Kentucky team that's been a lot better at home. They played Ole Miss. They were up 10-0 in that game, and that game went down to the final possession, where Ole Miss, I think, had to run out the clock in a 7-point win. And then certainly Texas was lucky to get out of there with the win, but Texas they're a hard watch right now. So you look at Kentucky's offense, and I should mention too, we mentioned the staff continuity. They kept Bush Hamdan, the offensive coordinator, for another year. Finally, I think it's the first time in like 5 or 6 years they had the same offensive coordinator. Of course, they had Liam Cohen, who's now with the head coach of the Jaguars. So they kept a lot of the staff, but they changed the roster. I think, 55 new players, 27 transfers. They're relying on a lot of those guys. Their offense is, they're playing Cutter Boley, who's a redshirt freshman, and some Tennessee recruiting, avid recruiting followers will remember that name as somebody that Tennessee was interested in a couple of cycles ago. And certainly this defense, they're big and physical up front. Josh Heupel noted that they're seeing a lot of the same guys in the secondary. So what do we make of this matchup, Ryan? What do we think? What are some potential areas that Tennessee should exploit, and where are some areas where this game could get closer than anybody wants it to for Tennessee?
Yeah, Kentucky's sort of a hard team to figure out this year because they've been really inconsistent. They've had, especially on defense, they've had some moments where they look like kind of the Kentucky team you're used to seeing, that like last week against Texas, holds them to 16 points. Like you said, Texas has kind of been a mess. How much of that was about what Texas did as opposed to what Kentucky did well defensively. But then, they've given up a lot of points in some games. Georgia's the one that stands out where Georgia just seemed to kind of have its way and scored, I think, 35 in that game. South Carolina scored 35 against them, but 21 of those points were kind of set up with short fields
or defensive scores,
or on turnovers. So those weren't really 35 points. Just that were a sign of the defense really struggling. So so defensively, they're 70th nationally in total defense, 82nd nationally in scoring defense. That's not what we're accustomed to seeing from a Mark Stoops defense. And to that point, Mark Stoops is on the hot seat right now. A lot of talk about whether he's going to be around beyond this season or whether they might make a change at some point. It's a fascinating discussion for a program like Kentucky. They're a basketball school. Let's face it. Mark Stoops has done some really good things there, but and Stoops is owed a pretty hefty buyout. I forget the exact $38 million, I want to say, if Kentucky were to get rid of him after this season. So that is a big number for a basketball school to commit to buying out a football coach, and then you got to go buy a new staff on top of that. On one hand, you could make the case that, hey, Kentucky, even in this deeper SEC, they've been better than what they are now. Not too long ago, they were winning 8 and 9 games a year with Mark Stoops, and he's been there a long time and done some really nice things. And I think he's the winningest coach in program history now, and they've had some good ones. Hal Mummy and some other guys have had success there too. Rich Brooks, obviously.
Bear Bryant.
Yeah, no doubt. So to be the winningest coach in program history there is no small feat, and he's done it during a pretty tough era, obviously with the big SEC that now is even bigger and more challenging than ever before. But yeah, and in the revenue sharing world, you would think that has leveled the playing field a little bit for a program like Kentucky that has to direct so many. I guess on one hand, they still might be directing a lot of revenue sharing money to men's basketball, but you've got an opportunity to maybe level the playing field from an NIL perspective, because where donors might want NIL money angled toward men's basketball, revenue sharing money can kind of make up for that a bit and make you a little more competitive. And they've had to live out of the transfer portal, so that's made things challenging, but they've done a better job, bottom line, than they had the last couple of years. So that's an interesting discussion, but this team clearly not playing as well as they had hoped to, even with some, a bunch of transfers that came in this year. Lost some noteworthy transfers from last year too. Barryon Brown and Dane Key at wide receiver, even though they've replaced them relatively well, those were big losses. So yeah, it just doesn't feel like a program that's moving in the right direction. And the defense, maybe the most alarming sign of that, because that's where they've always been pretty good under Mark Stoops. And this year, not so much. And then on the offensive side, you got a young quarterback in Cutter Boley that, like you said, is former 4-star prospect, pretty highly regarded player out of high school, reclassified from the 25 class to the 2024 class to come in there early. Went to a school in Lexington, so he's a hometown kid playing for Kentucky. If he can be a good player, fans will love him. But and he seems to be figuring it out. Last week was 31 of 39 passing against Texas. I think had some freshman moments, but did some good things against a pretty tough defense that Texas has. So you see some signs, some glimmers of hope here and there. But at the same time, it sounds like Kentucky fans have been pretty beaten up going into this week. Just not a lot of excitement about this team in this game because they haven't given this fan base a reason to be excited about where they're headed, even with a young quarterback at the helm. So it's a weird team and hard to sort of project how this game's going to go. And then you've got the recent history where, as we said, they've played a lot of close games in Lexington, going back to 2017. All 4 of those games in Lexington have been decided by 6 or fewer points. So do we expect another game like that? I mean, history says that's what you're going to get. Kentucky plays Texas close last week, so you'd think that's maybe what you're going to get. But then this isn't a very good Kentucky team compared to those last 7 or 8 Kentucky teams that we've seen. So it's a tough one to project, and especially because Tennessee's probably not playing its best right now either.
Yeah, looking at Kentucky's offense, I think for Tennessee, I mean, Kentucky doesn't have a player with over 200 receiving yards, which Chris Brazel had 177 against Georgia in one game. Kendrick Law is maybe a familiar name. He's an Alabama transfer. He's their leading receiver. Their second leading receiver is another familiar name, Willie Rodriguez, the tight end at Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Did they make a late push for him, or
they did? Yeah, that was an ill-fated late push where you probably got in there a little bit too late.
Tried to flip him, right? He was committed.
He was committed to Kentucky for a while, and he I believe that was an in-state kid for Kentucky. So you didn't have a great chance to get in there late and steal away an in-state kid. But kind of a deal where when you don't make a push till very late, and a school like Kentucky's made you more of a priority for months, you're kind of like, well, maybe I'm not a top priority for you. You're just coming after me at the last minute. So yeah, Tennessee made a run, made it interesting, but couldn't quite steal them away a couple years ago.
Yeah, they have 5 players between 155 and 199 receiving yards. They've only thrown 4 touchdown passes on the season. We're late October, and I'm sure Tennessee fans are saying, well, they just haven't played the Tennessee secondary yet. Granted, that's true. But yeah, I mean, some signs of life from Cutter Boley, but I think for Tennessee, you still got to put the game in his hands. I think you've got to defend the tight ends because Rodriguez has 12 catches, Josh Caddis has 12 catches. Those guys are a big part of the offense. Caddis has a couple of touchdowns. Then you got to stop the run. I think Kentucky's best player on offense is Seth McGowan, transfer from, I believe, New Mexico State, if I'm not mistaken. Started his career at Oklahoma, I believe. Yeah, McGowan played at New Mexico State last year. He's not a former teammate of Star Thomas, to my knowledge. And then Dante Dowdell is another, running back that they have that's producing. But McGowan has averaging over 5 yards a carry, 7 touchdowns. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say another former Tennessee target there in Dowdell that started off at one of the Mississippi schools, I believe.
Yeah, so
that's right. Went to Oregon, that's right, and then transferred to Kentucky.
I feel like he went to Nebraska. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. But so I veteran offensive line.
Dowdell went to Oregon and then Nebraska, and now is at his 3rd school in Kentucky. So there you go.
Yeah, one of these 4 school guys. Anyways, you gotta win the. This is always a physical game, right? You've got to be physical and stop the run if you're Tennessee's defense, and you've got to be physical for Tennessee's offense. You got to be able to run the football and protect your quarterback. For me, I think the biggest thing for Tennessee's defense is they've got to stop the run like they did against Alabama, right? If you're letting Kentucky run the football, then Kentucky can get their play action game going. Maybe that's when they can take advantage of your, potentially young linebackers that you may have in the game at a certain point. You've got to control the line of scrimmage. You got to get after this, young quarterback early, make him sort of second guess things, make him sort of feel pressure even if it's not there. I think that's key for Tennessee's defense. And for Tennessee's offense, they just got to get out of their own way, Ryan. I mean, I feel like they should be able to move the football. They have moved the football. They moved the football in Alabama, just didn't finish drives and shot themselves in the foot countless times. So this kind of leads me to my next point. I'm not out on Tennessee, Ryan, but I'm down on them. Am I wrong to be down on them? I know probably a lot of people are probably down and out. I'm not out yet. Still a lot of season left. They can still rise to the occasion, but I'm kind of down on them. I think this is going to be another nip and tuck game. Tennessee's not really giving me any indication that they can go and beat somebody by 17 points. Am I wrong there? Even a game like this, Kentucky's not very good, but Tennessee goes up there and it's usually a battle. And I don't know that Tennessee can get out of its own way enough on both sides of the football. I kind of pointed to the offense with penalties, drops, bad situational football. They've not been very good on 3rd down or in the red zone in SEC games. Am I overreacting? Am I wrong for being down? Critique my view of this football team, because I don't see any chance they're going to win 5 games to go to the playoff at this point. I just think they're too. I love how they compete. I love how relentless they are. They keep coming. They move past adversity. They're able to kind of handle the ebbs and flows of a game. And I think they've got a pretty good talent level, if I'm being honest, but they just make so many mistakes that just hurt themselves. Am I wrong is my view on this team wrong at this point of the season?
No, I don't think so. That's what I was going to say. I think they're a pretty good team, but they are a mistake-prone team, and that is a problem, especially in this era of football where the margin for error is so slim for everyone because the talent level is more spread out. You don't have the benefit of having just a more talented team than a lot of the teams you faced, like you could have if you were a 9-3 team. 5 years ago, you were probably just going to out talent a lot of the teams on your schedule. Now, not so much. And week to week, you got to be on upset alert because there really aren't many games that qualify as big upsets. And to that point, Tennessee's only an 8.5 or 9 point favorite at this point going into Saturday's game.
But the same spread as Alabama, right?
Yeah. So it's
that's why something's up there.
Yeah. So people are expecting this to be a close game, and the history points to that. But think of it this way. Tennessee's only an 8.5, 9-point favorite, and it's on the road. I mean, that's not a slap in the face to only be more than a touchdown favorite on the road in the SEC, but Kentucky hasn't scored more than 24 points against anybody besides Eastern Michigan that they scored 48 against. So a team that otherwise hasn't shown it can score more than 24 points, people are mostly expecting this to be a pretty close game with you. And I've talked to a lot of people who are picking Kentucky to cover because they just think Kentucky is or Tennessee is playing poorly enough right now that they're just not going to run away from anybody, and it's a fair concern, fair criticism. I thought it was interesting that DeSean Bishop kind of pushed back on my description of their offense not scoring as many points the last few weeks as they had the first few weeks of the season. They were scoring 40 plus against everybody. And then starting with the Mississippi State game where they scored 2 defensive touchdowns to get to 41. Arkansas, they scored 34 and obviously only 20 against Alabama. He still had the impression they're still scoring at a pretty high clip. And it's not that they're not scoring points. They're just not scoring quite as many. And when you have a defense like Tennessee's that's not stopping teams as often, that's a problem. So this team just looks, pretty flawed right now. And injuries aside, they've just had some problems consistently putting together drives. And teams that like Alabama that are able to keep Tennessee's receivers from beating them down the field seem to be having some success in getting off the field at times. You just kind of wait for Tennessee to shoot itself in the foot, and eventually they will a lot of times. So it's a really interesting spot where this team is, where you feel like they're still a pretty good team and they're still good enough to make the college football playoff if things go well, but they've got to start playing something closer to mistake-free football. And this week may not be the week that catches up to them again, but they're coming into some other games in the month of November, obviously Oklahoma being one of them, but Florida, Vanderbilt, all those teams are capable of beating them on any given day if they don't start to cut out some of these mistakes and finish drives. One more thing on Kentucky, Mark Stoops faced a lot of questions about this, or multiple questions about overtime and about their red zone offense, which has struggled recently. They were 1 for 3 in the red zone against Georgia and also 1 for 3 in the red zone against Texas. So 1 touchdown, no field goals in each game, and 3 trips to the red zone. So that's one area they've not been efficient lately at finishing drives, ranked toward the bottom of the country in that category. So that's something Tennessee needs to take advantage of in this game. If Kentucky's driving into your territory, make sure they're kicking field goals instead of scoring touchdowns. That's a great way to make sure Tennessee can kind of keep Kentucky at arm's length if they get a lead in this game. They've got to keep Kentucky from getting some confidence in that area because they are clearly struggling at scoring once they get into the red zone.
We have this football game coming up on Saturday night, Ryan. There's also a coaching search going on, and coaching search time in Tennessee means it is promo time at GoVols247. What can you tell us about the latest deal fans can get to join the site?
Yeah, just a few days on this one, so take advantage of it while you can. But right now, 60% off your first year as an annual subscriber. No better time to join GoVols247. You get right here in the heart of football season, the stretch run to early signing day. That's just a little more than a month away. It'll be here before you know it. Basketball season getting ready to get started this weekend with the exhibition game against Duke that sold out at Thompson-Boling Arena. So lots going on right now, and that baseball search obviously front and center. Hard to believe that we are at a point where a baseball coaching search has kind of stolen the show from football in the middle of the SEC schedule, but here we are, and there's going to be a lot of attention on that, and Ben McKee will have the latest on that throughout the search. So great time to join the site. Lots going on right now, and you definitely want to take advantage of that sale, 60% off while you can. I believe coinciding with that, I believe we're doing a full price monthly option where if you want to join at the full price option, that gets you instant access to Paramount Plus, which is a huge perk of being a GoVols247 subscriber. So definitely want to take advantage of that. Either way you want to join, no bad way to do it, but definitely if you want that monthly option, 60% off, a great price, one of our better offers of the year, and certainly well timed with this coaching search going on.
Yeah, Tennessee's out here in 2025 setting precedents. There was the Nico stuff in the spring where the first time a college football team basically cut its franchise quarterback or parted ways with its franchise quarterback. And then we have the first college baseball head coach to make the jump straight to MLB management with Tony Vitello. But as Danny White said on Wednesday, that's a credit to what Tony built here in the program that he has, which is why they're spending $108 or $9 million on the stadium renovation. So Ben McKee will have you covered on the baseball coaching search. He has a hot board up already. Ryan and I will have you covered on this football game as we venture up to cold Lexington. I don't know the temperature. It's going to be cold. It's going to be at night. But but it'll be 7:45 on the SEC Network with Tom Hart, Cole Kubelik, and Jordan Rogers on the call for that one. So we will have plenty of coverage between now and Saturday night, and plenty of coverage coming out of Saturday night as Tennessee goes up to Kentucky and takes on the Wildcats. We will have a podcast then after the game as well. So look.
Hopefully not from a windy concourse this time. That would not be quite as fun.
We will be inside. We will not be outside in the elements because we're soft, and it's 40 degrees in Kentucky is 20 degrees really. So, anyways, but yeah, we will appreciate you guys listening. Please leave us a rating and a review. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you get it, whether you're watching on YouTube or any other platform. And we appreciate you guys listening. So for Ron Callahan, I'm Patrick Brown. We'll talk to you guys here in a few days. Let me cue up the music because we have that now. And there we go. Talk to you guys soon.